All right, welcome into Carp's Corner. Got some good news, some bad news. Good news is college bowl games, college football playoffs on the horizon. We have NFL kind of rounding down here, just a couple weeks left. So these races are kind of heating up, and you can see where teams are. And again, some Tuesday NFL football, Monday night doubleheaders, all kinds of great things. So that's all really exciting. Unfortunately, though, there is some bad news, and even more. Know if it's more unfortunate, but some people who cover the sport seem to like to relish in some of the misgivings that happen and some of the unfortunate events and occurrences. And so we'll get into a little bit of that. Break down the Orange Bowl, break down the Cotton Bowl. One of the I think one of the really great bowl games that we're honestly getting robbed of, just with some player opt-outs. And I don't ever begrudge any player, obviously, of opting out, but I do think that it does stink a little bit when those things happen. And obviously it impacts the game. And I think that there might be a solution for this in the near future. And, it may not be a solution that works for everybody, but I think in certain situations, there will be an opportunity to maybe get some of these guys to play in bowl games who wouldn't otherwise do it. And what's the motivation? How do you encourage someone to do that? Well, we'll get into that as well. And then break down Ohio State a little bit, preview Ohio State and Utah in the Rose Bowl, how that ultimately is going to look out in the state of California, which, it's all kinds of COVID restrictions and everything going to that game. And a lot of people have asked me if I'm going to go out to it. And it's just, it's a lot of travelers, a lot of things going on. I don't mind visiting California. But when you have events and a lot of things out there, it's not near as enjoyable, just the traffic and everything and COVID protocols. We'll get into a little bit of that too. But first, I want to start off some tough news coming out about the Gator Bowl. Texas A&M pulling out of the Gator Bowl. They make the decision, I believe, through some of their protocols. They had a greater than 5% positivity rate. Right now, COVID kind of spiking throughout different parts of the United States. Cases rising, hospitalizations not near to the level that they were before, especially with people that are vaccinated, healthy individuals. And I would put college football players in that healthy individual category. There's nobody who is healthier and has better access to medical care, treatment, and round-the-clock supervision than your college athletes, especially college football players and professional athletes. They work out, they train for a living, they do all these different things. They have diets, dietitians, nutritionists, strength coaches, trainers that are available to them, doctors that are available 24/7. They don't have to go sit in ERs. They make phone calls and they walk right in. So really the level of risk for any collegiate or professional athlete is very, very minimal, especially if you play a high profile sport like football. So unfortunate to see Texas A&M not playing in the Gator Bowl. And as much as I feel for the A&M players, because it stinks for those guys, they probably looking forward to this. It's the Gator Bowl. It's not the college football playoff, but it still is an opportunity for some of those guys to play in their last game, and maybe for some of the younger guys to go out there and put their best foot forward and to begin to show what they could potentially be able to do next year. The one thing people talk about, and then they always forget, is you can build momentum in bowl games, especially with your young players. It's an opportunity for them to get out there against good competition in a meaningful game action, meaning it's nationally televised. There are people watching, and you get to see what they can do. And if they have a good game, that gives them the confidence going into winter workouts, going into spring ball, going then into the summer. And you can kind of see a little bit about what you have with your roster coming back, that is. And so there is that momentum piece. So as bad as I feel for some of the A&M guys, like Wake Forest, I feel awful for them. Dave Clawson, their head coach, comes out, talks about 72 players, they getting booster shots before they leave. They're back in mass. And, Nick Saban talked about this too. A lot of the schools are getting back into their 2020 protocols about how they're going to operate and what they're going to do to try to protect their players. And really, it's not a player safety thing. It's just making sure that you have enough players available to go out there and play and to make sure those players have the opportunity. So Wake, losing that opportunity, and that stinks. That stinks for those guys. Maybe they can find a team to fill in, and who knows? I mean, they've thrown out, I've heard Illinois thrown out, other schools. They said that they're not going to replace like last year. Unfortunately, the Gator Bowl, they've got a pretty substantial payout to some of these schools. And, that's going to be money that's going to be lost, but more importantly, the opportunity. And so that all happens. And then like right on the heels of that, Dan Walken, who covers college football and has done it for a while, he's paranoid about COVID and loves, and really, I think was disappointed when college football was played last year. He didn't seem excited about it, not trying to be a solutions guy and find a pathway to play. His thing was, hey, we should just go lock ourselves in our rooms and not come out and not do anything. And so, he has to take a victory lap for this. And so in response, to Dave Clawson's comments, hey, we've got 72 players getting their booster when they came back. We're in a good spot here. We're wearing masks. Dan Walken then tweets it. It's really good that these teams are rushing to get the booster shot, but it's a little late in the game as far as reducing the risk before bowls. Should have done that a few weeks ago. Listen, it's in the middle of the season. Players got vaccinated before the season. They don't want to be dealing with side effects of booster shots and everything else. And so it's great to see Dan Walken, who covers college football, likes to spike it when bad things happen. And when unfortunate things happen, sometimes people who, like Wake Forest and a lot of the A&M players and everything, and even the guys who contracted it, they're no fault of their own. We asked a lot of these guys to get vaccinated. They were pressured. They go, they do it. They sacrificed. Maybe some of them didn't want to get it. They do it for their team and so that they can continue to play. And now we're still with all this protocol mess where most of these guys, there's no hospitalizations for the overwhelming majority of college athletes. And to my knowledge, with the NFL, which is a little easier to track, in 2020, when there were no vaccines, there were no players hospitalized with COVID in the NFL, and none to my knowledge this year as well. And college football, I think, looks very similar to that. So Dan Walken throwing this crap out here about, my goodness, it's a little late for the booster. That drives me absolutely insane because these guys did everything we asked them to do, and they're still now losing out on the opportunity to go and cover some of these games. And people want to do it safely. They want to be responsible and make sure that they're obviously taking all the information into account. But Dan Walken just going around it's beside me how someone could be excited and like kind of be happy when people lose their opportunity to go play a sport that they love. Unbelievable. Before we get into, the big games of the college football season, the playoff games, and then I'm going to throw the Rose Bowl in there too, the granddaddy of them all with Ohio State. One game I think that we were really robbed of, high entertainment value. Pitt and Michigan State, Peach Bowl. Feel bad for the Peach Bowl. They got two of these teams in here. Michigan State on the rise. Mel Tucker comes back, ranked really highly throughout the season. They had a Heisman Trophy candidate in Kenneth Walker III, just barely misses out going to New York, taking on the Pittsburgh Panthers, the champions of the ACC. They're moving in a direction that, Pat Narduzzi's been slowly chopping away, finally get to have that breakthrough year. Clemson's a little bit down. They seized control. They beat Clemson. They did everything they needed to do. And now Kenny Pickett opts out. And I have no problem with these guys opting out. A little surprising with Kenny Pickett, given the fact, he's a Pitt guy, program kid, been there for a long time. He's going to get drafted in the first round. I think this game could honestly help him, but that's beside the point. He's going to play a Michigan State secondary where he should have feasted on these guys. It's the weakest part of Michigan State's team, and they're a pretty good ball club. But I was excited to watch this game. Two coaches, doing good things at their school. I call it the Mark D'Antonio Bowl. Both of these guys coached with Mark D'Antonio, and he was most recently at Michigan State. Him and Mel Tucker coached together at Ohio State. Pat was on his staff, both at Cincinnati and at Michigan State. And then he goes and becomes the head coach at Pitt. And so I thought that there was going to be, a nice game, some good things going forward. And these teams were both excited to play there because this isn't something that either one of these schools has really had the ability to do, to play in one of these New Year's 6 games. So I thought it was going to be really good. And you take the two best offensive players off, each team that are going to be in this game. And it just, it loses some of its luster. Now, I'm all about solutions. I'm a solutions guy. There's a problem. Okay. There's got to be some sort of solution. Now, is it a reasonable one? Okay. Well, that's when you have to begin to kind of figure it out and see if the solution you produce is something that's reasonable and then can actually be achieved. We want to see these players play in bowl games. Fans do. I'm not going to sit there and be critical of them when they opt out because of the monetary reward that's potentially on the other side. And we've seen guys in the past, Jalen Smith, Jake Butt, have serious injuries that impacts their draft stock. They still get drafted, but the other thing too is they're dealing with that injury then the rest of their life, the rest of their career. And, in both of those guys' cases, I think it impacted the duration of their career and ultimately probably the quality of player that they could have been at their highest point. And so those players are trying to protect their bodies for the monetary gain that they've worked so hard for throughout the course of their life. The solution to this is while these bowls have all these payouts, and they pay the schools, why not pay some of the players? If you have some of the veteran guys, we're in the NIL world now, all these bowl games have sponsorships. And if you want to draw eyeballs and you want to see people watching your game with your title sponsor on there, with whatever it is, Peach Bowl, Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, who cares? But you want to see your name beside it. You want people to be tuning in to watch. I think the solution is you carve off some of that cash. And if there's some draft eligible players that are considering not playing, yeah, you're not going to be able to offer them the millions of dollars in the NFL. But it's 50 grand get you there? Does 100 grand get you there? Maybe 250. I don't know what the number is. And it may be different for every bowl game, depending on the sponsor and then the priority of the bowl game and how big it's going to be and how good those players are and how many eyeballs they could potentially draw. But I'm all about solutions. That may be a little bit unsavory to people. The pay for play. Well, how it's a name, image, and likeness deal. I'm providing my name, my image, and my likeness to your bowl game. And in turn, you're going to compensate me for that. I'm getting to play one last game. And maybe there's a lot of guys that still opt out. But I guarantee you, if some of these guys had a little bit of monetary incentive on the back end, obviously it's going to pale in comparison to a first round or second round contract. But that does make you think a little bit like, okay, I'm not just doing this for nothing. And now I have the ability to kind of earn something in this game. That, I think, is the solution right there. And I think that would solve a lot of problems. And then to me, I think if you threw some cash at those guys, then we'd get to see that good Peach Bowl that I wanted to ultimately watch. On to the semifinal games, the two big matchups. And I'm not besmirching the other bowl games. I've enjoyed watching all of them thoroughly. Whatever games are on tonight, tomorrow, I'm going to sit down and watch, because what's the other option? Watching Hallmark movies, watching Christmas stuff. I'll watch some of that. I watch that during the day, but when I can watch a bowl game and sit down at night, I'm going to sit down and watch that bowl game. I'm going to lock in. I'm going to sit there with my boys, my daughter. We're going to talk a little football. We're going to talk some shop, and that's going to be fun. And we're going to do that together as a family. And that's how we celebrate Christmas at the Carpenter household on Christmas week, watching bowl games. Start with the Cotton Bowl, Cincinnati taking on Bama. David versus Goliath. You've heard the analogies, all the things a million times. Cincinnati, about a 2-touchdown dog. It's 13.5, 14.5, 14 sitting in there. Over under sitting around 58 points, 60 points. I saw it as high as that at one, different places. So it's moving around, a little bit. I think a lot of people are going to expect this game to be a blowout, but there's a couple reasons why I think Cincinnati can keep it close. Their defensive backs, their defensive line, and their quarterback. Defensive backs, where is Bama really good? Now Mechie's out, and that's going to help Cincinnati immensely. But they got Jameson Williams, who's really good. Maybe the first receiver taken in the draft. Very, very talented player. But there's some talented defensive backs for Cincinnati. Kobe Bryant won the Thorpe Award. Sauce Gardner's probably going to be, somewhere first, second, third round draft pick. They've got some really talented dudes who are out there. Are they good enough to cover Jameson Williams one-on-one, no help? No, not to that level. But I do believe they're good enough that they can cause problems for this Bama passing attack. And so keep that in mind as you look at these matchups and understand, what? Cincinnati's got a veteran secondary. They're really good. They can slow down Bama where they're really good. Good on good right there. And I think Bama's got the edge. but it's not this massive talent gap disparity that you sometimes see. Defensive line, got some really talented guys up front. Myjai Sanders hasn't had the sack numbers that I think he wanted to coming in, but he's a long guy. He's probably going to be, like I said, a top 3-round draft pick. He is an NFL caliber player, 6'5", 255, 260. He has some length. He's going to need to be back there to make sure that he can pressure Bryce Young in the pocket, move him around. And this Bama offensive line, they played really well against Georgia, but against Auburn, they struggled. We watched them struggle against A&M. The Cincinnati blitz scheme, they can do some things, but they have some good linemen up front. Curtis Brooks, 7 sacks this year. Myjai Sanders, tall, athletic, long dude, NFL caliber player. And so they have that at the defensive line. That's the second box you can check. And then third, got a veteran quarterback, guy who started a ton of games in Desmond Ridder. 30 touchdowns, 8 picks. He's going to have to make sure for Cincinnati to win that game, he's leaving with 8 picks. Cannot increase that number during the game. Need to throw a couple touchdown passes, need to have some big plays, and they have the wideouts to do it. He's gotten better this season at throwing the deep ball. Bama's defense, even though they're a little inconsistent this year, they're still too good that you're going to have to try to drive the ball down there in 10, 12 play drives. You can maybe do 1 or 2 of those, but Cincinnati's going to have some big plays. Desmond Ridder is an experienced quarterback. He's tall, he's athletic. He's going to have to be able to complete some of those deep balls over the top to get some chunk plays, but also his legs. The one thing that's really tough for any great defense to account for, and especially great defensive coaches, because you can't scheme things when the play breaks down, is athletic quarterbacks. And historically, athletic quarterbacks have given Nick Saban's defenses trouble. Desmond Ridder is tall. He has a long stride. He can gobble up yards. He's not afraid to run. He's got a little bit of wiggle to him. And so that's kind of the third piece, the third prong of that attack, and his ability to run and maybe break down that Bama defense, extend the play, and to be able to have some success. Now, believe me, Bama's really good. They've got elite players, NFL guys over the top, and heck, they have the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in Bryce Young. It's going to be a tall order for Cincy. I think it's going to stay inside of that 14-point, that 2-touchdown margin. I believe it'll stay in there because of those 3 reasons. Looking at the Orange Bowl, Michigan, Bama, or Michigan, Georgia, rather. Georgia favored by about a touchdown, 6.5 to 7.5. You can kind of see it moving around a little bit. This game's going to come down to a couple things. Number one, neither one of these offenses I would define as like outwardly explosive. They rely on their defense. They rely on their defensive front. So which team is going to make the fewest mistakes? Because if you make a mistake, you give one of these offenses a short field, they will score the football. But if you ask him to drive 80 yards consistently, well, that might be another story against the talented defense like both of these teams will be facing in this game. So who makes the fewest mistakes? The turnovers? Is there a special teams blunder? Things like that need to play a clean game. And then it's going to come down as well to quarterback play. Cade McNamara, Stetson Bennett. Both of these guys, a little bit of the game manager mold. We throw them in that category because they're not big, flashy dudes. They haven't thrown for 50 touchdown passes. Cade McNamara, 15 touchdown passes, 4 picks. Stetson Bennett, 24 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Neither one of these guys are lighting the world on fire with their arm. And they've gotten in chase games, they've struggled. When they've been able to run play action and pick their shots, they've had success. Getting Pickens back helps immensely for Stetson Bennett. And so this quarterback battle going back and forth, which one of those guys makes the fewest mistakes? Who can convert critical third downs? Can either one of those guys use their legs to pick up a first down when really necessary? But there's another piece to the quarterback battle. The backups. JT Daniels is healthy. Do they try to put him in the game after watching what Bama did to Georgia? Does Kirby Smart sit there and say, you know what? We need to get JT Daniels in there. He gives us more of an option throwing the football, pushing it down the field. Can we rotate him in there a little bit? Will that be effective? Let's not forget, the Tua and Jalen Hurts situation when Nick pulled him against Kirby the first time. And so maybe Kirby Smart's thinking that in the back of his mind, like, you know what? Scared money don't make money. If I have to make a move, do I start sliding this guy in there? Do I have some packages? Do we have some series where we might go with him and try to throw the ball a little more? Could be big dividends, huge rewards, or does it throw the continuity of the offense off? And do you make a costly mistake? That's the downside. And then for Michigan, it's JJ McCarthy. He's a guy that's going to play in this game. He's athletic. He throws a pretty good deep ball. Jim Harbaugh's been trying to work him in throughout the season. We watched him make a critical mistake against Michigan State, watched him come in. He made some plays later in the year, making some plays against Ohio State. So he's done some good things. How Michigan deploys him, how successful he is, he's going to have to be that X factor for the Wolverines. You got Corum, you got Haskins. They're going to be able to run the ball, but they're going to need some big plays. They're going to have to try to stretch this Georgia defense laterally and try to wear out their defensive line, just like Michigan did. Much easier said than done. I think JJ McCarthy and his athleticism is going to be a big piece of that. And then, the third prong of it is when you sit here and start diving in, Travion Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, some talented defensive rush players who can impact the quarterback more, who can get after him and disrupt their opposing quarterback sitting in the backfield. Neither Cade McNamara or Stetson Bennett is overly athletic. They both can move pretty well, but can you get them off the spot? Can you make them uncomfortable? Can you create some of those negative yardage plays early in the drive to force the second and longs, the third and longs? That's where it's going to come down to. I like Michigan inside the number. I think they can win that game. They have a more narrow road than Georgia does. I think Georgia is capable of a little bit more explosive plays, especially if Pickens is back. But I like both to take the points on both of these games. And I think Michigan might even be able to pull the upset in this one. This has an over under 44.5, 45 points sitting in that hole right there. I think it's probably going to come in slightly over that. And I see Michigan just making just enough plays to be able to get this thing done. They're a team that's playing with a high level of confidence and a large degree of belief right now. And that poses really well when you're playing an elite team, and you're going to need that going into a game, taking on the Georgia Bulldogs, who were the almost wire to wire number one team, took over that spot early in the season, rode it for a long way. We'll see how they responded. I think if whoever gets an early lead in this game might start to feel that confidence a little bit. Michigan riding it in there high, Georgia needing it after that Bama loss. Granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, Ohio State, Utah. Ohio State favored by about a touchdown. It's going to come down to Ohio State. Can they stop the run? I think they can win this game whether or not Utah has over 150 rushing yards. For Ohio State, though, you want it to feel good. You want to have been able to, you want to be able to have corrected some of those issues that you saw against Michigan, the bleeding for yards, that push that they were getting up front. And if you sit there and look at Utah and their rushing attack, Tavian Thomas, very, very talented player. And then their quarterback, Cam Rising, he's really good running the football, used his legs. You saw him use them against Oregon somewhat in some of these big plays. That is what this Ohio State front seven is going to have to do to shut them down, is put the locks on those dudes. And what's interesting about this is everybody's been playing the 4-2-5 because everyone, gets a lot of receivers on the field. Against Utah, Ohio State, a little depleted at linebacker. They're going to have to step up and try to get three linebackers on the field as much as possible. Try to get there to make sure that they can stop the edge. Utah runs a lot of tight end wing formations, two tight ends beside each other, love to run behind it, get that push out there on the edge, run their little inside zone, outside zone, and create some of those seams. Going to have to be real stout and be real physical there. I think CJ Stroud will have a day. I don't think Utah has enough to be able to slow down this offense. Don't probably foresee Garrett Wilson playing. I think Chris Olave is going to try to find a way to play, even if it's just for a half. I think you'll see him out there on the field. And then obviously Jackson Smith and Jigba. But with that, I think we'll get to see a nice little dose of Marvin Harrison Jr. Get him out there, see what he can ultimately do. Had a really, really strong spring. Emeka Egbuka. They've got some really, really talented young wide receivers, and we've only seen these guys just kind of scratch the surface with what they've been able to do. So excited to see those dudes get out there on the field. Maybe if Garrett Wilson doesn't go out and play. It kind of wraps up the college football this week with the loss to the Rams. Seattle now will finish with a losing record for the first time in Russell Wilson's career as a starter for the Seattle Seahawks. It's been a long time. They've kind of flirted with this divorce thing going back and forth now for, it feels like, the last 2 years. And I'm just saying this after watching that game and watching Russell Wilson and seeing what they have around him, and really the failed Jamal Adams trade. And that's Jamal Adams is a good player. They gave up a ton to get him, and he's been injured, and that's tough. Um, it just really hasn't worked out. Offensively, they still have some issues. Defensively, they're not there. This is going to be a rebuild. I don't know if Pete Carroll, how much longer he sticks around. If he does, I mean, this guy's right around 70 years old. But I think it is time after this year to see that split with Russell Wilson in Seattle. Seattle needs to rebuild. They need to find a young quarterback, and Russell Wilson's still hanging out in his prime, and he has a nice runway left to be able to potentially go and help another football team. And so I know there's a couple weeks left, but I think Russell's tenure in Seattle is probably about at its end, and I think he'll probably make a big push this year to try to get out of there and go somewhere else and go play with a contender and try to win another Super Bowl somewhere else in the NFL. That concludes this edition of Carp's Corner. Excited then to circle back after the college football playoff. After all that happens, to see how exciting some of those things are. See the Rose Bowl game, everything else. We're leading into Christmas. We got these games here coming up in about a week. We'll dig into even more of them a little bit, break down some of the other ones. We got all that coming up for you here in the next episodes. But for this edition of Carp's Corner, thanks for tuning in.